Hi and welcome to Holland and Barrett's Facebook Live with me, Dr. Rupi from the Doctor's Kitchen. Today I'm super excited to show you some cauliflower tacos that you guys voted for. And I'm also going to be showing you about all the different health benefits of all the different ingredients that I'm using. I work as a general practitioner and in emergency medicine, and I'm a firm believer in what you choose to put on your plate being the most important health intervention that anyone can make. So to get started, we're going to be using some cauliflower, but actually before I tell you about that, we're going to be doing a competition today to win some gut-friendly products. So we've got some chia seeds that I talk about in my book as well, and some brown rice as well, which is full of fiber, and you can also win a copy of my book, The Doctor's Kitchen, that I'll sign for you too. So we're going to crack on with our recipe. Now, the cauliflower tacos, super easy to make. It's fantastically easy and healthy for you. It's absolutely delicious. We're going to show you all the different elements to it. We're using cauliflower, which is one of my favorite ingredients. Now, cauliflower is easily accessible up and down the country. It's a type of brassica vegetable. It's part of the same family as things like broccoli and rocket and Brussels sprouts, and they have a fantastic array of different sorts of chemicals that we know are anti-inflammatory, and that's from a lot of different studies. So all I'm doing is just taking the florets and just chopping them into bite-sized pieces, around 2 to 3 centimeters per them. And the reason why is because it just makes it a little bit easier to cook. They're going to cook at the same time, and they're going to get a lovely crusting with the marinade that we're going to put on together as well. And you can actually even use broccoli if you didn't want to use cauliflower, if you didn't like that taste. But the good thing about using broccoli is that it's such a bland sort of vegetable. It soaks up all the different marinades like a sponge. And we're going to be using lots of punchy, bold flavors like paprika and red chili as well. So you'll notice that I'm using some baby cauliflower, but you can use normal sized cauliflower as well. It's absolutely fine. And please do send me any questions that you have about any ingredients that I'm using or any general questions that you have. I'm happy to answer as many of them as I can as possible in the time that we've got today. So for these, we're just going to put them over here. And then the marinade that I'm making is going to be consisting of 4 different ingredients. And I'm using coconut oil instead of extra virgin olive oil, which I usually cook with. Now, the reason why I'm using coconut oil instead of extra virgin olive oil is that we're taking this to a higher temperature. You can also use things like avocado oil or like sesame oil as well, but sesame oils can have a little bit too much flavor to them. So coconut oil that's odorless is probably the best one to use. I'll just put this in the bin. All right, so we've got our cauliflower florets here, as you can see, really, really nicely, all the same size, pretty much. Some coconut oil here. So I've got about 3 tablespoons of melted coconut oil in here. As I said, you can use avocado oil, that's absolutely fine. And forget my ingredients here. So in goes some paprika. Now you can use hot paprika or you can use some sweet paprika. If you're a little bit sensitive to the heat, then I'd suggest using sweet paprika. And we're also going to use some red chili flakes as well, just a teaspoon of this. And the ingredients and the quantities are all on the website as well, but I'm using 1 teaspoon of red chili flakes and some sweet paprika too. So just give this a mix around. Now in addition to this, we're going to add some lime and some lime zest. Now, the reason why I'm using the zest as well as the actual lime juice is because a lot of the phytochemicals, the chemicals that you find in plants, are concentrated in the skins of the actual vegetable or the fruit. So we want to try and use the skins as much as possible to get the most that we can out of things like lime juice. Now, it's a good source of vitamin C, as is paprika and red chili, and that's very good for immunity and stuff like that. But we're using it for the flavor as well. It's always important to maintain the focus on the flavor of your food as well as the function of food. It's amazing all the different research studies we have about the different ingredients and the phytochemicals, but if it doesn't taste good, then it's not worth anything. So that's why I try and maintain a focus on the enjoyment of food as well as the medicinal qualities of food as well. So just with the lime juice that goes into the marinades. I'm just using half the lime because you don't want to use all of it. It can be a bit strong for people, but when it cooks out in the oven, you won't really be able to take too much from that. Okay. Good. So that goes in here. And if you find the red chili a bit strong, you don't need to add that. It's absolutely fine. Now, we're also going to season, and then seasoning brings out, again, the flavors that we've got here. We're not going to go in too much salt. And we're going to use maple syrup as a sweetener to balance the heat that we've got going here as well. Now, maple syrup is one of my favorite ingredients. It's fantastic. It's got a really deep, earthy flavor to it, and it's going to marry very well with the chili spices that we've got. But remember, it's still a sugar. Even if it's a natural sugar, refined sugar, sugar is sugar. So we use it in the appropriate amounts and in the right quantities. That's the most important thing. And primarily as a flavor enhancer rather than the nutrient value that you may find in some maple syrup. So 2 teaspoons of this. Good, a little bit over. And that goes through with the coconut oil. And this is just going to coat our lovely cauliflower flourish that we've got here. All right. So you can see it's going to give this deep flavor, and the cauliflower is a perfect match for this because, as I said, it's very bland and it doesn't have a distinct flavor itself. So it will marry very nicely with that. That goes in here. Good, so just give this a good mix around. And the other thing about using something like maple syrup, you can use things like honey or even a touch of brown sugar as well, is that it's going to give it a lovely little glaze as well. And it's going to get that crusting that we want to try and get out of using the cauliflower flourish. So it gives a slight crunch to the meal. And you can, I encourage people to look at the recipes and try and go off-piste as much as possible. So if you fancy putting some red onions in this, or maybe some diced peppers or something like that, then just go for it, because these recipes are there to be like guides. You can actually add more ingredients that you prefer to use, for example, like broccoli or anything like that. Brussels sprouts would go very well with this as well. So this goes into a preheated oven at 200 degrees centigrade, and it's a little bit hotter than I usually would use the oven at, but that's because we want to get that lovely crusting on the outside. It's going to be about half an hour to 35 minutes. I'm going to try and remember to turn them halfway through as well. This gives us ample time to make a fresh salad and a chili paste as well. So for the fresh salad, I'm just going to bring my ingredients over this way. Some peppers, we've got some coriander here, and some avocado as well. So you'll notice this recipe has got tons of different ingredients, and one of the best things that anyone can do as a health hack is to try and mix up your ingredients and mix up the types of ingredients that you use on a weekly basis. Now, this is good for a number of reasons. Not only are you getting the benefits of the individual ingredients themselves, like for example, avocado is a good source of fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, and those have got lots of benefits for cardiac health as well as your general health as well, skin, hair, all that kind of stuff. But it also improves the diversity of your microbiome. So the microbiome is the population of guts of microbes that live in and around the body, largely concentrated in your gut. And from novel research that we know about now, we understand that having a really good diversity of different types of gut microbes is very important for overall health. And the way we try and encourage diversity is using different types of ingredients, because they feed off different types of ingredients. So we're getting peppers, we're getting avocado, and we're getting different types of fiber in this meal as well. So we're using whole meal grain, the tacos and that kind of stuff. So the microbiome is a really interesting field, and there's a lot of attention being given to it, but it's important to take it all with a pinch of salt at the same time. So having a wholesome diet, having different ingredients and high fiber foods, probably the best things you can do. That's the most important thing. So a little tip to get the seed out of the avocado is just to lightly tap it like this and then twist, and then the seed comes out very easily. I'm just going to get rid of this. I used to work for a plastic surgeon who was a hand surgeon, and he used to tell me that avocados were a common source of injury. So you've got to be really careful about slicing it. So I'm just using just the tip of the blade just to plunge down into the flesh, and then going across, just making a cross like that. And then with a spoon, we're just going to pop them into the bowl here as well. And I think a lot of people still, actually, in my clinic as a GP, I talk to them about getting wholesome sources of fats in their diet, And unfortunately, there's still a widely held belief that fats are bad for you. All types of fats are bad for you. And that's really not the case. What we want to concentrate on are getting more wholesome sources of fat. So that's things like nuts, that's things like seeds, and it's things like avocados as well. Not to go overboard, you don't want to gouge on them, but you want to have a good quality sources of fats in your diet because it's super important for brain health or the structure of your cell membranes. That's the structure of all the different cells that live in and around your body and your organs, your skin. It's very, very important to get fats in your diet. So, got some avocado here. Let's go on that side. Got some beautiful coriander. Now, coriander is a bit of a sticking point for a lot of people. A lot of people cannot deal with the taste of coriander, and that's actually a genetic component. Some people are just adverse, so they just cannot deal with the taste of it. It can taste quite soapy, it's a very strong taste. I am not one of those people. I love coriander, and I think it's a fantastic ingredient. It's, again, a very concentrated source of phytochemicals like lutein, very good for your skin health and liver health, and it's one of those ingredients that I think we could do a lot more of. And you don't need to go for all the spices and all the different sorts of weird and wonderful exotic spices. Simple kitchen herbs, coriander, basil, rosemary, are just as potent as the exotic ones like turmeric and ashwagandha and all the other things as well. So just going to roughly chop these up. And already the smell is fantastic. I'm going to pop that into the bowl. And we're going to go in with a squeeze of lime juice as well. And that actually stops the avocado from going brown at the same time. Give a tiny bit of seasoning to this. A bit of salt. And we're going to go in with our bell pepper. Now, again, like getting a bell pepper in is, yes, another source of things like vitamin C. It's going to give a lovely crunchy texture, which marries well with the smooth texture of the avocado. But again, it's just about getting more variety, more color into your diet. And the more colors that you get into your diet, the better it is for your overall health, and in particular, your gut health diversity as well. I'm just going to put these away. Okay, so to cut the bell pepper can be a bit awkward for people. Just slice it in half and take the top off like I have done. And then just chop across if you want to julienne it. And just make sure you make a claw with your hands. I don't want to see any injuries coming to A&E because of trying this recipe. So just make sure you get your fingers out the way. And again, this side as well. And like I was saying, when it comes to diversity, it's really about getting the rainbow effect of different colors into your diet as much as possible. So getting greens, getting purples, getting yellows, it really is all good for you. And that's the most important thing. Rather than concentrating on specific forms or things like supplements and stuff like that, they can be important. But the most important thing is diversity in your diet. And so that should be the first thing that you think of when you're trying to improve your gut health. Okay, so we just give that a quick mix over here. And I'm just going to drop a little bit of extra virgin olive oil. The other thing about fats is that lots of the vitamins that you find in greens, like coriander, for example, and the brassica vegetables, like Brussels sprouts and rocket, they are fat soluble. So they actually need a source of fat to help you absorb them as well. So that's another reason, another sort of sticking point about fats that I think more people need to recognize, that you need a good source of fat to absorb the nutrients that you find in different sorts of ingredients. All right, so this is going to go to one side. So that's our salad done. And I'm going to show you a super easy chili paste to do with this. And we're going to use cashew nuts as the sauce here. Now, cashews, all I've done is just soak them for about 20 minutes in some warm water. So it just softens them up slightly and it just makes it easier to blend. Now, cashews are a really interesting ingredient. They're full of different minerals. Those are very good for immunity and your general health as well. Also, it's a very good source of fat as well. So we've got lots of different wholesome sources of fats. The good thing about cashews is that you can blend them and soften them, and they can actually be replaced as like a dairy supplement. So if you don't eat dairy for whatever reason, it's a good way of getting that creamy texture into your foods, as well as a good wholesome ingredient. So for this, we're going to use a food processor. Now, I usually would use a smaller food processor that could blend it a little bit more finely, but we're going to experiment with this and we'll see what happens. But I'll make another supplement if that doesn't work. Okay, so with the cashews, just going to get my Jamie Oliver style sieve here and then sieve out the water. So this goes straight into our blender here. Put this over here. got lovely smooth cashew. And to this, I'll just leave this down here. To this, we're going to add some more paprika. So you can already get the impression that it's going to be quite a smoky, delicious meal. And there's these sorts of flavors going through it. Just about a teaspoon of that. I'm going to go in with some extra virgin olive oil. Now, I prefer using this when I'm making things like Mexican dishes and Spanish meals and that kind of stuff, because it's got a wonderful flavor that marries quite well with all the different flavors and textures that we've got going here as well. We're going to go in with some sun-dried tomatoes. Now, I usually use the sun-dried tomatoes that are dry, and then you just rehydrate them and get in a little bit of warm water, just as we've done the cashews as well. But you know, if you use these ones, they're fine as long as they're a good source of olive oil that they're being soaked in. And the other thing I'm using, which is a little bit unusual, you don't need to add this, you can quite easily use red chili flakes, it's absolutely fine. But I'm using a dried ancho chili that I've just rehydrated in a little bit of warm water for about 20 minutes. Now, the ancho chili is a Mexican chili. It's more of a fruity flavor rather than a heat flavor. And again, I mean, it's a type of chili. It's got things like vitamin C in. So again, all these different ingredients are really, really good for skin health and overall immunity health as well. But I'm using it really from the flavor point of view. If you're worried about vitamins and vitamin C in particular, the best way of getting those are from colorful fruits and vegetables like the bell peppers and the greens that we're using. But this is really as a flavor enhancer, and it's fantastic as well. It gives lots of different ingredients, and that's what the aim of the game is. So for this, you can open up the flesh and you can take out the seeds, but the seeds aren't very hot, but I'm just going to take that out just in case this is a hot one. And that goes in here. I'm just going to hopefully blend this, and it's going to come out lovely and smooth, but if it doesn't, I've got a trick up my sleeve. Pop this on. Okay, so it's blended pretty well actually, considering, I mean, usually what you do is use a smaller food processor, so you get a lot more traction with the blade and it's a lot smoother, but this isn't looking too bad. So you get a waft of like a sweet chili flavor rather than a strong flavor. And if you wanted to add even more like nutrient value as well as flavor to this, like a peppery flavor, you could add just a single clove of garlic. And again, that's another sort of prebiotic fiber, which is very good for gut health. But yeah, no, this is pretty good. I'm going to pop this into a little bowl here, so you can get a picture of the flavor. So we're going to use this as a paste that we're going to put over the tacos, and it's just going to give like a lovely like sweet chili flavor to it. Again, with all those lovely fats as well. Okay, so that goes in here. And if you have any questions about gut health, digestive health, or any general health questions that I can answer about nutrition, then just send them to me and I'll try and answer as best as I can. Good, all right, so put that to one side. Good, I'm going to check on the cauliflowers because I'm not too sure how long it's been in, but I might need to change them over. Okay, great. Okay, so already we've got a lovely little crusting on the outside, as you can see here. Let's move this around. I'm just going to use a spoon. Oh, maybe I'll use one of these. Just give this a little mix around. And hopefully not get it over my shirt. It's going all right. So you've got a little bit of crusting on the outside, but we want a little bit more than that. So these are probably going to need another 20 minutes or so in the oven, but it's looking pretty good, and the smell is great as well. We've got a lovely sweet smell from that maple syrup, and hopefully a bit of crusting too. All right, so we've got, as you can see, I mean, we've pretty much done everything. We have our salads ready, we have our chili paste that we've made, and you can imagine just increasing the ingredient size, the actual amount of the ingredients, and you can make a big meal out of this. You can have like a few more tacos, a few more avocados shoved in there, and you've got like a big table platter of lots of different ingredients. And the last thing we're going to garnish our tacos with is going to be the pomegranate seeds. Now this is a little bit fancy, they can be a bit expensive, but pomegranates again are a lovely source of all those different vitamins, and again adding a lot more color. And not only is that good from a nutrient point of view, it's good from a flavor point of view as well. So a little burst of fruity goodness. Now to serve this, you can either make corn tacos. So corn tortillas you make just with masa harina flour that you can buy online, and a little bit of water mixed in a bowl, and you just make little balls out of that, and then you just press it onto a dry hot pan. And I actually teach you how to do that in my cookbook, The Doctor's Kitchen. Or you can buy store-bought flour tortillas as well. So we've got some simple brown wholemeal tortillas here, and all I'm going to do is just warm those on a dry pan when the cauliflower is ready. And that's about it. That's literally how quick and easy this meal can be. It's full of different sorts of ingredients, and we know that to improve your microbiome, which is the population of microbes that live in and around your body but largely concentrate in your gut, it's about variety, it's about getting different spices, and it's about getting different colors as well into your diet as much as possible. The one thing I haven't talked about that much is inflammation. So you'll hear a lot about these different sorts of ingredients, particularly brassica ingredients like the cauliflower, reducing inflammation. Now it's really important to understand that inflammation exists on a continuum. So we need inflammation to clot our blood, to fight infection. So it's not about removing all elements of inflammation at all, it's about finding that balance. And the way we find balance is making sure that we're getting a nutrient-dense diet, and we're reducing stress, we're sleeping properly, and we're actually moving our bodies, because that actually has an anti-inflammatory effect. Now, in a Western sort of environment where we're stressed all the time, we're sleep deprived, we don't eat the right foods, a lot of the foods are processed, we're probably tipping the balance of inflammation a little bit the other way, so we have a pro-inflammatory effect. And the way we can mitigate that, eating nutrient-dense diets like all the different colors and having those different ingredients that reduce inflammation naturally. The other more effective ways, or just as effective, are concentrating on our sleep patterns, so making sure you're getting adequate amounts of sleep, but you're getting quality sleep as well. So the best way to improve your quality of sleep is removing electronics and making sure you're not eating too late at night, and you're actually using your bedroom as a restful place rather than a workspace as well. So I know a lot of people that bring their technology into the bedroom. I used to be one of them. And also removing laptops and stuff like that as well from your bedroom, because that can be a little bit, or it can definitely affect your sleep as well. So those are the things that I think people need to be aware of, because there's a lot of notion about this is anti-inflammatory and this is pro-inflammatory, and I think it's really important to get the balance right and actually allow you to understand that you need a balance of inflammation rather than just removing all inflammation as much as possible. So with that being said, we've got another 10 minutes until the cauliflower is done, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have, as well as any comments that you have about the actual food. And there's also going to be a competition. The competition question, I believe, is what do you think my favorite plant-based protein is? And you're probably aware, if you've read the book, that plant-based proteins are something I'm a big fan of. I think we actually need to get more plants into our diet. I'm not a vegan, but I'm certainly mostly eating plant-based. And there's a whole section in my book about the different sorts of plant-based proteins that are available. So I'd love for you to answer which one you think is my favorite, and we'll give the answer at the end, and you can win this hamper over here. Cool.
Excellent. We've had loads of questions coming in. So Karen asks, how long do you recommend marinating this recipe for?
Oh, okay, great. So as long as possible is the answer, Karen. And the best way to do it is make the marinade, break up your florets, put the marinade over, and then put it in the fridge. And anywhere between 20 minutes to 60 minutes is great. But honestly, if you don't have the time, if you want it to be a quick recipe, just like we've done today, it doesn't really affect the flavor as much. Because when you're using things like meat, you need the sorts of ingredients to go into the actual product itself. But when we're using things like cauliflower and other sorts of plant-based proteins, it's not that much of a worry. So 20 minutes is great. Thanks for the question.
Excellent. Daisy May asks, could you use lemon as well as lime?
Yeah, so lemon is, again, another fantastic ingredient to use. Again, I'd recommend using an unwaxed lemon and then just grating it and just putting it over, because the grated skin honestly does make a difference. It gives that little bit of caramelization, a little bit more of zestiness as well. And it's a good way of using those sorts of nutrients that you find in the skins too. And you find a few other recipes that I've made where I actually chop up the skins very roughly, and I put them into the baking tray as well. And you can actually do that with this recipe as well, and just remove the limes afterwards so you don't get that tanginess. But yeah, lemons are a fantastic sauce, and the marinade fits really well with it too.
Mm-hmm. And Maria would like to know, what is your favourite easy and healthy lunch to bring to work?
That's a really good question. So, because I work in the NHS and sometimes you don't stop for lunch, you need to have something super quick. And one of the things I've got into the habit of recently is just getting some cannellini beans, a nice quick marinade. So you just cook them in a pan with a little bit of garlic, a little bit of onion, some extra virgin olive oil, some spices. So something like paprika would be great. Put the cannellini beans in that are pre-cooked, so you just drain them and then add them to that. And then right at the end, chop spinach and a little bit of coriander or another herb of your choice, like parsley if you don't like coriander, and just wax that all together, and that's great. You could serve that with some pre-cooked brown rice or have it in a wholemeal wrap. And then probably top with some avocado as well. That's a super easy way of doing it. Sometimes also, and this is something to get into the habit of, is the first thing I do when I wake up, and if I know I'm leaving the house by like 7 in the morning, is I'll go into the kitchen and I'll just chop up some root vegetables if I haven't had the chance to do this the night before, and I'll just put those in the oven for 30-35 minutes. Olive oil, a little bit of seasoning, and that can be like parsnips, carrots, it could be sweet potato. If you chop them small enough, like 3 to 4 centimeter pieces, then they will cook it all at the same time. And then that way, by the time you're done with your shower and like or your morning routine and stuff like that, your food for your lunch is already ready. You just put it into Tupperware and off you go in the morning. You can even have some for breakfast as well with an egg or something like that. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an idea.
Perfect. Liz says, hi Dr. Rupy, do you have any recommendations when it comes to swapping foods that are less good for you in your digestive health for foods that are better for you?
Okay, that's a really good question. So thanks for the question. So a really easy way is just looking for as much whole food as possible. So whole food exists on a bit of a spectrum. There's a belief out there or a myth out there that we need to eat as unprocessed as much as possible. Now, that is true to an extent, but really it's about the spectrum of whole food versus ultra-processed food. By virtue of you steaming or cooking or even chewing your food, it therefore becomes processed. So it's almost impossible to have a completely wholesome diet unless you're eating a raw diet, which I do not recommend. So really it's about looking for the fiber and removing the processing as much as possible. So a simple swap might be brown or red rice instead of white rice, or going for the wholemeal tortillas rather than the white flour tortillas, or having sweet potato with the skins on, or trying to minimally cook your broccoli as much as possible. So instead of overcooking it or boiling it in water for like 10-15 minutes, all you really need to do is put it into a saucepan, a little bit of water, maybe 30 to 40 mils, and then just cooking it like that for about 30 minutes, 3 minutes or 3 to 4 minutes or so. So you've still got that lovely crunchy texture and you're maintaining the nutrient value as well. So these are examples of eating as much more whole food as much as possible, and that is generally good for your health. But what I would say is that if you are finding some symptoms, whether that be abdominal cramps or bloating, it's really, really important to make sure you go and see your GP. And if I happen to be your GP, come see me. But it's really important to always have those symptoms checked out rather than trying to use food in the first instance. You just want to make sure you're ticking all the boxes. I'm going to check on my cauliflower real quick because I don't want to overcook them. Let's see. Okay, yeah. We've probably got another 10-15 minutes on that. Someone can probably tell me.
Claudia would like to know, can this recipe help with IBS? And if not, are there any recipes that you would recommend?
Yeah, so IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is a spectrum of conditions. Oh, sorry, it's a spectrum of conditions, and again, it's something that you have to be diagnosed with before you start trying to mess around with different sorts of recipes. So a common treatment these days is a low FODMAP diet, and that's recommended for no longer than 3 months, with the advice and the guidance of a dietitian or nutritionist or a GP who's very well experienced in this. Now, there are certain elements from your diet that you may want to consider taking out for a short amount of time, and those are things like beans, certain types of veggies like cruciferous vegetables, so the cauliflower that we just used might not be good for IBS sufferers, onions, garlic, and those sorts of things that are fermentable fibers. There's a whole list of things. If you look for a low FODMAP diet online, you'll be able to find what those sorts of ingredients are. But I must stress, you must do this under the guidance of a practitioner, because unfortunately, a lot of the most healthiest ingredients are high in FODMAPs, and that's something that you want to remove for a short amount of time. So you want to slowly reintroduce those with the guidance of a practitioner. The other thing with IBS is that there are lots of ingredients, unfortunately, that can flare up symptoms. And again, if you haven't been diagnosed with IBS and you're having symptoms, you must get those checked out as well. It's really important.
And Hannah would like to know, how can she add more calcium into her diet as a vegan?
Adding more calcium as a vegan. So this is really interesting, because a lot of people believe that the only sources of calcium are things like dairy and cheese, and they are quite high in calcium, but it's more that they're the most common sources of calcium. Now, as a vegan, I'm not a vegan, but as a vegan, you can get different sources from things like lentils, beans, legumes, so all those different sorts of chickpeas and black beans. Those are actually quite high in things like calcium, as well as some other ingredients as well. But also things like sesame. So sesame seeds are actually quite high in calcium. Tofu is also high in calcium. And also some of the nut milks that you find on the supermarket shelves are fortified with these different ingredients, including B12 and calcium and iodine as well. So those are sort of things that you want to look out for. The other thing about iodine is that it's very important for women of childbearing age. And it has been shown to reduce fertility if you don't have iodine. And the thing about iodine is that it's the most common source in the UK is actually in dairy milk. And so when you remove dairy milk, if you go vegan or plant-based for whatever reason, you want to make sure you're getting good source of iodine. So that might involve a supplementation, again with the guidance of your GP or your dietitian. But you can also get iodine from fortified milks if you're going to have it daily as well. So that was a calcium question, but I've veered into iodine, but I think it's an important topic. But thanks again for the question.
Karen would like to know, are there any recommendations of recipes for people with arthritis?
Okay, yeah, so arthritis is an interesting one. So arthritis is an inflammatory condition of the joints that we see quite commonly. It usually occurs in older age, but there can be some autoimmune conditions that can lead to arthritic symptoms. And these are typically pain in your joints. It can start in your thumbs. It can go into your bilateral, both of your joints at the same time, elbows, knees. And there is some evidence about the use of a nutrient-dense diet and arthritis. So if you're having lots of things like dark green leafy vegetables, the spinach, the kale, the cavolo nero, that can be potentially beneficial for you. If you're getting lots of vitamin C, again, that has an anti-inflammatory effect. But really, it's about getting to the root cause of why someone has arthritis. So sometimes, as I said, it can be an autoimmune problem. Sometimes it can be an intolerance to certain foods. Sometimes it can be from overuse, and that's something that we see. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, in the UK, it can be due to excess weight. So when you've got a lot of weight on your body, you're putting a lot more pressure onto those joints as well. Not all the time, but certainly it can be. The other thing is that if you are overweight, and this is something like morbid obesity, it can have an inflammatory effect. So you might be consuming things like refined sugars, refined carbohydrates that can have that pro-inflammatory effect that might be impacting your joint health. So it's something to consider. What I would like to encourage everyone really is to focus on wellness rather than ridding a symptom. Your symptom is a symptom of an underlying cause, and it's about getting to that root cause. Why do you have arthritis in the first place? And when you focus on being well, nutrient-dense diet, improving your sleep, improving mobility and your exercise as much as possible, as well as reducing stress as much as possible, then there's some interesting effects that can happen. I hope that's answered your question.
James would like to know...
Sorry, one thing I forgot to talk about is omega-3 as well. So omega-3 and the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 has been shown to have a pro-inflammatory effect if you're having low levels of omega-3 versus high levels of omega-6. And omega-6 we find in refined sugars, refined carbohydrates, deep fried foods, and that can put it out of balance. So making sure you're getting lots of good sources of omega-3, nuts, walnuts are really high in it, as well as chia seeds, but also algae fish supplements. If you are algae supplements, if you are vegan, those are probably something to consider. Sorry, there's so much stuff I could talk about. I'm going to check my cauliflower one more time because I don't want to burn it. We're going to go for a little bit longer.
It's smelling delicious.
Yeah, it does smell nice, yeah.
So James would like to know whether there is a difference between good and bad fats, and if so, what kind of foods contain the good type?
Okay, cool. So a very easy way of figuring out whether something is a good or bad fat is looking at how whole this fat is. So if it's things like cashews or almonds or avocado, these are whole sources of fats. They haven't been processed, they haven't been fried, they haven't been cooked any way, they haven't had their oils destroyed. So that's a good source of a fat. Bad fats are things that we find typically in processed foods, so deep fried fatty foods, refined oils, unfortunately. They can use quite a harsh extraction process and that can damage the oil. If you take a very good quality extra virgin olive oil and you try and deep fry it, unfortunately that does destroy the bonds between the chemicals, and that can actually have a pro-inflammatory effect. So those are the fats that you want to steer clear of. The other thing, when I say processed foods and refined foods, I'm really thinking about biscuits, cakes, pizzas, all the stuff that a lot of people have a taste for, unfortunately. But those are things to not completely rid out of your diet, but certainly only have in moderation. So maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And if you have issues or health problems, it might be something to exclude for a longer period than that. And it's something that you should do, again, with the guidance of your dietitian or your general practitioner. It's a really good question, though. I think a lot of people are confused about fats, good fats, bad fats. What does it mean? And it's really about getting wholesome fats as much as possible.
Great. Hannah asks, she says, "Hi Rupi, loving the live."
Hi Hannah.
What other nuts would work well in the recipe?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so as long as you soak the nuts adequately, then you can actually use lots of different sorts of nuts. So almonds without the skins, if you can get them skinless, will probably work well, but you might have to soak them for longer. The good thing about cashew is that it's quite spongy after just like 10-15 minutes of soaking, so it tends well to be blended very easily. Something like almonds without the skins on, if you soak them for a couple of hours, that can be used as well. You can use pepitas or pumpkin seeds. Again, that might need a little bit more soaking, but you can certainly use that as long as you've soaked it for about 2 hours or so. And the other thing's walnuts. Walnuts is fantastic. It's a great source of omega-3. It's one of those sorts of fatty acids that we're talking about. It's deficient in a Western diet, unfortunately. And it's a good source of things like minerals, selenium, which is very good for immunity. So you can use that as well, again, soaking for an hour or two.
And
That's a really good question, though. These are great questions.
Montana would like to know, can you expand on how important it is to look after the gut?
Okay, yeah, sure. So gut health is probably one of the most important subjects in nutritional science right now. It literally has an intersection with every single specialty that I can think of right now. So when we're talking about diabetes, or whether we're talking about psychiatry, so that's mental health, or cardiovascular disease, so that's heart disease, it all has a role because your gut is not only digesting food, but it's creating metabolites. It's actually having impact on your sugar levels. So if you have a diverse microbiome, so you have a good selection of different species of bacteria and they're healthy in themselves, then they're going to be better performing their actions that can reduce your sugar levels or keep them stable. They release neurotransmitters that can improve your mood. They can reduce inflammation, which is something that we've already talked about earlier on, which can have an effect on cardiovascular health as well. And inflammation as well as gut health is something that's having a bit of a resurgence in terms of all the different medical specialties. Everyone's talking about inflammation and its impact on obesity and cardiac health and stuff like that. And the same thing with gut health as well. I talk a little bit more about it in the book and the different ways in which you can improve it. But the easiest ways is a nutrient-dense diet, so getting variety into your diet, a rainbow diet, using different sorts of spices as well, because that has an anti-inflammatory effect and that can improve gut microbiome populations, as well as getting lots of different sorts of fibers. And this is what we're talking about with a FODMAP diet. Unfortunately, it does take a lot of different sorts of fibers out of your diet, so it's not something you want to do for a long period of time. But the prebiotic fibers are things like chicory, artichokes, garlic. These are all fantastic sources of fiber that are really good for your gut health, and that can have lots of different effects on the brain and the body as well. The other thing about gut health is that it's kind of like the forgotten organ. We really haven't regarded the gut microbiome, so the population of gut microbes, as important, unfortunately. And what we've witnessed over the last 100 years is a steady reduction in the types of diversity and the types of bugs that we get in children and every generation thereafter us. So it's something that is coming into importance a lot amongst a lot of medical practitioners, and so that's why it's super important. I'm going to check on my cauliflower because I'm talking quite a bit and I'm a bit worried about these. Okay, I think these are going to come out. All right. Put this over here. So you've got this lemony sort of flavour, and you've got a little bit of char on the outside. Everyone's oven is a little bit different, so if you need to put it in longer or you need to put it in less, that's fine. I'm just going to finish off this recipe by just putting some wholemeal tacos on tortillas. Again, dry pan, you don't need to put oil in it or anything like that. Medium to low heat, just keep an eye on it and just flip it over in about 60 to 120 seconds, and just to warm it through. It just makes it's easier to wrap up. And I should probably put this on a presentation thing. Let me just use these. Put this to one side. Oh, I can answer questions at the same time.
Great. Shirin would like to know, what are the best plant-based sources of fibre? The
best plant sources of fibre is really interesting because they are similar to the best plant sources of protein. And that's the good thing about plant-based proteins, because they do have fibre as well as protein. So these are things like beans, that's one of my favourites is azuki beans, and red kidney beans, again, really accessible up and down the country in cans with just water, so you want to try and get the ones without salt. Other ones are like cacao. So cacao is a powdered form of the cocoa bean, which is how we make chocolate. And, I don't want to make sure I don't burn this. That actually is quite novel in that it contains all the different essential amino acids that make a complete protein. There's things like nuts and seeds, so they're really good sources of protein that you can find, as well as the more novel sorts of products like soya, tofu, those are probably the best. And then pulses of all different sorts, so lentils and mung beans and all those different things. So when you look at the bean section, you're really looking at all the different proteins. And the interesting thing about protein in general is that a lot of people think that we are deficient in protein or we don't get enough protein, particularly if a largely vegetarian diet. But actually we get quite a lot of protein in our diet. In fact, we get up to the normal limits in a vegetarian diet or in a general diet as well. What we really lack is fibre. And the good thing about having more vegetable plant-based proteins is that you're actually getting fiber in it as well. And the more general thing is that food isn't just a macronutrient. Food is there's protein in a banana. But we don't just isolate certain foods into different macronutrients. We want to look at the whole food itself. So the whole food is what we want to concentrate on. All right, I'm going to turn this off and quickly finish the recipe, and then I'll chat to you guys. So with this, if I can I'll probably use this. All right, so our base is going to be these lovely cauliflowers that are sticky and sweet. And they've got a little bit of char on the outside, not too much. Good. We're going to go in with a little bit of our salad. So we've got the different colours here, the yellow peppers and the avocado, and coriander, plus or minus. And that goes there. So again, every single element of the food is again adding diversity, it's adding nutrient value, it's adding flavour. It's exactly how food should be. It shouldn't just be restrictive. Okay, I'm just going to smear some of this paste on the outside. And this paste you can use in so many different ways as well. Like sometimes I'll put this paste into some wholemeal noodles, or I'll put it on some wholemeal bread and then have some sliced avocado on top of it. There's so many different ways in which you can use it. And we're just going to finish with a little bit of the pomegranates because it's a celebration, it's a luxury item. And there we go, this is it. So you can build up so many more of these. This recipe will probably serve 2, maybe even 3 people, or 2 with leftovers. But that's your general dish. This is the cauliflower tacos with pomegranate, yellow bell pepper, and chili paste. I really hope you enjoy that. Good, I'll answer more questions.
Perfect. Elsa asks, what do you think about kefir? I think it really helps digestion.
Great, yeah. So kefir is a probiotic product. It's formed from the grains, and you can make coconut kefir, but the more common one is dairy kefir that you use with dairy milk and stuff. And the good thing about different probiotic foods is that they introduce different species of bacteria into your gut. And there are some evidence and some clinical studies to show that it can improve the diversity of your gut microbiome. Now, this isn't to say that everyone needs to have kefir. There are so many different ways in which to improve the diversity by mainly getting different sorts of fiber and different sorts of nutrient-dense vegetables into your diet. But if you're looking at probiotics specifically, there's sauerkraut, there's kimchi, there's all different sorts of fermented pickles, and I think kefir is wonderful. And if you can get that sort of probiotic into your diet daily, then that's fantastic. All power to you.
And Tom would like to know, would this recipe be good as a post-workout meal? Is there a way of adding more protein to it?
Sure, yeah. So a good way of adding more protein to this, something I actually did another recipe for, very similar to this. If you drain some black beans and you put it in with the cauliflower right at the start, just as I did, that again is another good way of getting protein and fiber into the meal as well. So the black beans will take up all that flavor. You can use the same amounts of the marinade, and you're getting the crunchiness and the pungency of the cauliflower taking up all those marinade spices as well. So if you did want to have more protein than this, then you'll get some that way. And also, don't forget with the cashews, you've got some protein in that because it's a nut. And you've got some in the wholemeal wrap as well. And this is quite a filling meal, I must say. Like I probably could only do one of those, particularly if you're having black beans as well with that. But there's other ways as well. You can, if you did want to use different sorts of mung beans or pew lentils, the cooked pew lentils, the ones that you find in packets, just pour that over the top and mix it all through and then bung it in the oven and it's good to go.
And Chloe would like to know, how long before bed would you suggest eating dinner?
Okay, so it's a really common question I get actually, how long between bed? And I would, as a rule of thumb, it's usually 2 to 3 hours. But saying that, sometimes I'm working till midnight and there's nothing that I'm not going to go to bed hungry, so I'll eat something and then I'll go to bed. So allow yourself to break the guide, so to speak, but as a general rule of thumb, I'd say 2 to 3 hours. The reason why is because your food wants to digest, you want to be awake for that process, and when you're sleeping, you don't want to be taking the activity of your body away from what it should be doing, which is resting. And there is some evidence to show that when you're digesting food, it releases certain hormones that can impact with the quality of your sleep as well. So you want to try and do that earlier, and then focus on sleep when you're going to sleep.
Great. And Caroline asks, is it better to make your main meal lunch or dinner?
That's a question I get a lot actually. Which is the most important meal? Is it breakfast? Is it lunch? Is it dinner? And it really depends on your circumstances. So for a lot of people, they find that having lunch a little bit later and having a proper lunch and a light dinner is beneficial for them because they find it helps them rest. It's more convenient for them. But some people, myself included, cannot do with a big lunch meal, and then I tend to have my dinner a little bit bigger than my lunch and but earlier as well. So I think if you're going to have a big dinner, you probably want to do it a little bit earlier, and that's generally my main meal. But it really depends on the kind of person you are and the environment and your circumstances as well, and that's the most important thing to remember. As a general rule of thumb as well, I tend to eat in a rough 10 to 12 hour window. Now, I don't want it to be restrictive. Obviously, I go outside that window a lot, but generally you want to try and keep your eating window to that time period. And the reason why is because it can impact on inflammation levels, but your sleep as well. So if you're eating too late, then it can impact your sleep. So if I'm going to be eating at 8 in the morning, I'll try not to eat later than 7 p.m., 8 p.m. But again, that's a general guide.
And this isn't a question, but Ketna says she is loving the live.
Oh, thanks.
And she says it is so refreshing to hear a doctor talk in detail about the importance of gut health.
Oh, that's really nice of you. Thanks so much. I think it's a bit unusual for doctors to be talking about nutrition in this way. And one thing that I'm trying to focus on is a non-profit that I've started called Culinary Medicine with a group of dietitians and doctors who are interested in this subject. And we're actually teaching doctors how to cook just like this, as well as the foundations of clinical nutrition on a non-profit basis. So we have done a few modules at Westminster Kingsway. We're doing another one in June, and it's just for health practitioners. And I'm actually going to Bristol Medical School in July. We're going to be doing an intensive course for 10 medical students, teaching them exactly what I've been talking about as well with different modules. So thanks very much for the support. I really appreciate that. And hopefully more doctors will be talking in this sort of way in the future.
So Anna would like to know, are there any spices in particular that can help with your body processing food?
Okay, so when you say processing, I'm assuming you mean digestion. And there are a few carnative spices. There's things like fennel, there's cumin, which is why a lot of Indian cooking, I don't just do Indian cooking, obviously I've done a Mexican-inspired meal today, but a lot of Indian cooking includes a lot of these different spices because it does help with bloating and digestion and that sort of stuff when you're eating things like pulses and chickpeas and lentils. But you know, if you're having issues with digestion, you want to look at the whole diet and figure out what the root cause of that particular problem is, if that's a problem. There are other sorts of spices that can improve gastric emptying, things like peppermint and licorice as well. And there's lots of different sorts of more natural ways of improving digestion that your GP can talk to you about as well. But also looking at the quality of your diet, looking at how much fiber's in your diet and how much you're consuming as well. Probably one of the easiest hacks I find, because a lot of people scoff down their food, and I used to be one of them, is just breaking up the chewing process. So making sure you're chewing properly 15 to 20 times before you swallow. And actually when you start practicing 15 to 20 times, you realize how little you are chewing your food. And it's really important to maintain a mindful attitude to how you're consuming food and the environment that you're consuming your food in as well.
That's a great hack. And Ollie asks, what foods should we be eating to encourage necessary bacterial growth in the gut?
Oh, okay, right. So again, it's the things that I was talking about a little bit earlier, but just to recap, it's a nutrient-dense diet, so having a rainbow effect of different ingredients in your diet. So looking for the colours is probably the easiest way. So in this particular meal, we have white, we have greens, we have yellows, we have reds, we have all the different spectrums. Then trying to get that across the week is a really easy way of improving the diversity of your microbiome. Getting different sorts of prebiotic fibres or just different fibres in general. So having more whole foods, so that's wholemeal tortillas, for example, black beans, lentils, different sorts of nuts and seeds are also good sources of fibre too. And that's a really good way of improving the diversity. Having different sorts of spices has been shown to improve gut health overall, so it's something to encourage at every mealtime. You'll notice that the kind of recipes that I make and the kind of recipes in my book as well are pretty highly spiced, and that's because of the medicinal value of the spices, but also adding different sorts of nutrient value and making food a lot more pleasurable as well. So, you know, cumin and all the different sorts of kitchen herbs as well. It doesn't have to be turmeric or the other sorts of weird and wonderful spices. It can just be simple things like basil and rosemary and coriander, all the simple sorts of kitchen herbs that we have up and down the country.
And Eleanor would like to know, what do you think about fermented foods like sauerkraut and fermented drinks like water kefir or kombucha? Okay,
cool. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but kefirs and sauerkrauts, these are sorts of products that are probiotic. So they contain species, usually lactobacilli of different varieties, that encourage a good gut health population in the gut. And it has been shown to improve diversity. But the easiest way is to focus on nutrient-dense foods and getting different sorts of fibers into your diet as much as possible. So probiotic foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefirs, I think they're wonderful, and I think they're great. They add a lot of flavor, and actually it's sort of a way of eating as our ancestors would have, because we didn't have refrigerators 100 years ago. We wouldn't have been able to preserve food, and so we've evolved really to eat preserved foods and pickled foods, fermented foods, because they're very good for gut health as well. So it's this constant communication with our environment that we might have lost through sanitation and hygiene and overcooking the food and sanitizing it. And there's obviously a benefit to that because it reduces the number of infectious diseases, but also it reduces the diversity of our food. So I think probiotic foods are fantastic. And if you can tolerate them and you can afford them, then that's great.
So Mono would like to know which foods and natural medicines or supplements would be good for people with acid reflux?
So acid reflux is a common complaint that I see as a general practitioner, and really the first thing you want to be looking at is your diet. So you want to be looking at the refined carbohydrates in your diet. So that's things like pizzas, biscuits, pastas. You want to be looking at the eating pattern. Are you eating and grazing throughout the entire day where you're constantly producing acid? Or are you eating defined periods of eating? Are you eating too late? Because if you're eating too late, that can stimulate a gastric acid production. And then when you lie down at night, then that acid goes and refluxes up, and that can cause those symptoms as well. So there's lots of simple ways in which you can actually improve your symptoms of gastritis by just doing like simple lifestyle hacks essentially. So one of the things I would always suggest is go into your GP 100%, because there are lots of other reasons why you might be having that reflux, and it's always important to get it tested and make sure that we've covered all the bases before we start introducing certain foods that are meant to be good for gastritis symptoms. You want to get to the root cause of the symptoms, not treat the symptoms itself. But some of the things are reducing refined carbohydrates, having more wholesome meals. There's some people that swear by probiotics and having probiotic-rich foods like kefirs. So again, it really depends on the cause. So it's quite hard to answer that question, unfortunately. I'd rather not just say, oh, have some peppermint capsules, because it really depends on what the root cause is.
And Zorica says she loves your recipes.
Oh, thanks, Zorica.
And she asks, are you going to cook with Holland and Barrett again?
Yeah, hopefully. If they ask me to cook again, I'm more than happy to cook again, and I'm more than happy to have any recipe suggestions that you have. And if you want me to do anything particular, then just holler at me. So
lots of people have answered the question. Asked the question. Sorry. Let's talk about your food. Your protein.
Oh, sorry. There's a competition going on. So my favourite plant-based protein is actually shelled hemp seeds. And the reason why is because they're very versatile. They can be used in smoothies to add a little bit of protein and fiber to it. You can use them as a salad topper. So sometimes I mix it with a little bit of red chili or some paprika, and I use that as a salad topper to put on tops of like spinach and chopped vegetables and that kind of stuff. And also you can cook with it as well. Like you can make a crust. You can put it over even the cauliflower. You can make the marinade out of that and then put the hemp seeds on top of that. So my favorite plant-based protein is probably shelled hemp seeds. But again, there's so many different sorts of shelled hemp seeds that you can, there's so many different sorts of beans and legumes and lentils that you can have that add lots of protein to your diet. And as I said, the most important thing is probably fiber anyway. But yeah. Did anyone answer that question?
Yes, we've got a winner.
Oh, you got a winner?
It's Caroline.
Caroline. Well, congratulations, Caroline. I will sign you a book and we'll send it out to you, I guess. But thanks for answering the question. Oh yeah, okay. So I'm being gestured to eat my food. So I'm going to eat this. Try not to spill it all over me. Let me just move it over here. All right. Just to prove to you that it is edible and it does taste delicious. No, I'm sure it is. Okay, so I tend to just wrap it up like that. I might just give this a little, it's quite a lot. Okay. So you've got all the different flavors here. And that is delicious. Loads of different types of spices. You've got the zestiness of the lime coming through. The sweetness of the maple syrup balances it out. It's wonderful. And you've got the crunchy little bombs of pomegranate seeds. That's really good. So I really hope you found this easy to do. I did it in less than 30 minutes, as you can tell. And I'm trying to not eat with my mouth full. But I really hope you like watching this Facebook Live. And hopefully I'll see you again on Holland and Barrett. And I hope you enjoy the recipes and the cookbook as well at the Doctor's Kitchen. And I will catch you another time, hopefully. See you later.